The sound of an open palm striking a man's face echoed through the marble lobby of the Kensington Grand Hotel, sharp and obscene, cutting through the soft piano music like a knife through silk. For a single frozen second, nobody moved. The bellhops stopped mid-step. A woman near the fountain lowered her champagne glass. Two businessmen by the elevators turned their heads in perfect unison. And in the center of it all stood Marcus Ellis, a black single father in a modest gray suit, holding a small pink backpack in one hand and the trembling fingers of his 7-year-old daughter in the other. His cheek burned crimson where the ring on Victoria Ashford's right hand had split the skin just beneath his eye. A single bead of blood traced a slow line down his jaw and fell, soundlessly, onto the polished white floor. Victoria Ashford, 42 years old, worth an estimated $4.6 billion, and heiress to the Ashford Global Holdings empire, stared at him with an expression that was somewhere between disgust and disbelief, as if she could not comprehend that a man like him had dared to occupy the same square of oxygen as her. "How dare you?" she hissed, loud enough for every guest in the lobby to hear. "How dare you bump into me? Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus said nothing. He simply looked down at his daughter Amara, whose eyes had gone wide and wet, whose small hand was now squeezing his so hard her knuckles had turned pale. And in that moment, something in his face shifted, something so quiet and so terrible that the bodyguard standing 3 feet behind Victoria took an involuntary step forward, because he had seen that exact expression once before a long time ago, in a place most people in that lobby could not point to on a map. And what that bodyguard was about to notice, pinned beneath the lapel of Marcus Ellis's cheap gray suit, would unravel the life Victoria Ashford had spent 42 years building. Because Marcus Ellis was not who she thought he was. And by the end of the next 90 minutes, the entire world would know his name. If you're already feeling something, do me one small favor before we go any further. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments below. Because I read every single one, and I want to know where in the world this story is finding you tonight. To understand what happened in that lobby, you have to understand what happened 4 hours earlier, in a small kitchen on the east side of the city, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the paint was peeling near the window and the refrigerator hummed too loudly at night. Marcus Ellis was making pancakes. He was making them in the shape of hearts because it was Amara's 8th birthday. And every year since her mother had died 3 years ago in a car accident on the interstate, Marcus had made her heart-shaped pancakes with strawberries on top. And every year Amara pretended she did not remember that her mother used to do the exact same thing. Marcus was 36 years old. He worked 2 jobs. In the mornings, he drove a delivery truck for a produce company that paid him $14 an hour. In the evenings, 3 days a week, he tutored high school students in mathematics at a community center that paid him almost nothing but gave him a quiet room and a cup of coffee. He was not a rich man. He was not even a comfortable man. But he was a good father, and everyone in his neighborhood knew it. And that was the kind of wealth that did not show up on a bank statement, but showed up in the way his neighbors saved him leftovers. And in the way the old woman on the 3rd floor knitted Amara a new scarf every winter. And in the way the man at the corner store slipped an extra apple into his bag on Fridays and pretended he had not. Amara sat at the kitchen table in her favorite yellow dress, the one with the little white flowers, the one she had insisted on wearing because today was special. Today was the day her father had promised her something he had never promised her before. He had promised her tea at the Kensington Grand Hotel. The Kensington Grand was the most famous hotel in the city, a building of gold and marble and glass, where politicians ate lunch and movie stars checked in under fake names, and where the afternoon tea service cost more than Marcus made in an entire day of driving that truck. Amara had seen it once on television, and she had turned to her father with those enormous brown eyes and asked, in a voice so small it nearly broke him, whether people like them were allowed inside a place like that. Marcus had told her that people like them were allowed anywhere. And then, for 6 months, he had saved every dollar he did not absolutely need. He had skipped lunches. He had walked instead of taking the bus. He had told Amara he was not hungry when he was hungry, and he had smiled when she offered him half of her sandwich, and he had taken it only because refusing would have made her sad. And now, on the morning of her 8th birthday, He had the money folded in an envelope in the inside pocket of the one good suit he owned, and he was going to walk his daughter through the front doors of that hotel with his head held high, because that was what he had promised her, and Marcus Ellis was a man who kept his promises. What Marcus did not know, as he flipped a heart-shaped pancake onto Amara's plate and listened to her laugh at the way the strawberries slid off the top, was that Victoria Ashford was also going to be at the Kensington Grand that afternoon. She was hosting a private luncheon for the board of the Ashford Foundation, a charity she had founded 10 years ago, ostensibly to help underprivileged families, but which in practice was mostly a tax structure and a photo opportunity. And she was in a bad mood, and she did not like to be touched, and she especially did not like to be touched by strangers. The taxi ride to the Kensington Grand cost Marcus $22, which was more than he had ever spent on a single car ride in his life, but Amara had insisted that they arrive like real ladies and gentlemen, and Marcus had laughed and told her that ladies and gentlemen did indeed take taxis, and so he had waved one down at the corner of 5th and Lexington and helped her climb into the back seat like she was a princess climbing into a carriage. Amara pressed her nose against the window the entire way. She pointed at the tall buildings. She pointed at the woman walking 3 tiny dogs on 3 tiny leashes. She pointed at the man selling roasted chestnuts from a metal cart, and Marcus made a mental note to buy her a bag on the way home, because he had budgeted for it, because he had budgeted for everything. He had the entire afternoon planned down to the minute. Tea at 3. A walk through the park at 4:30. Ice cream at 5. Home by 6:30, so she could open the one gift he had wrapped for her, a small silver locket that had belonged to her mother, which he had been saving for exactly this day. He had rehearsed the whole afternoon in his head so many times that he could almost feel it happening before it happened. What he could not have rehearsed, what no amount of planning could have prepared him for, was the woman standing just inside the revolving doors of the Kensington Grand at exactly 2:57 in the afternoon. Victoria Ashford was already furious when Marcus and Amara stepped into the lobby. Her assistant had booked the wrong private dining room. The florist had sent white lilies instead of white orchids. Her driver had been 6 minutes late that morning, and she had fired him in the back of the car before she had finished her coffee. She was standing near the concierge desk, phone pressed to her ear, snapping at someone on the other end of the line, when Marcus, holding Amara's hand and looking up at the enormous crystal chandelier that hung from the lobby ceiling, took one step to the side to let a group of tourists pass, and his shoulder, entirely by accident, brushed against hers. It was the softest contact imaginable. It would not have knocked over a glass of water. It would not have disturbed a sleeping cat. But Victoria Ashford whipped around as if she had been struck by lightning, and her eyes, blue and cold and rimmed with the kind of eyeliner that costs more than most people's groceries, fixed on Marcus with a fury so pure and so instantaneous that Amara actually took a step backward. "Excuse you," Victoria said, and the 2 words came out like glass breaking. Marcus turned, saw her, and immediately lowered his head in the small, polite way that black men in America learn to lower their heads in certain rooms, and he said quietly and clearly, "I apologize, ma'am, I didn't see you there." He meant it. He had not seen her. He had been looking up. But Victoria Ashford did not want an apology. Victoria Ashford wanted a target. "You didn't see me," she repeated, and her voice had risen now, loud enough that heads were beginning to turn. "You didn't see me. Do you know how much this jacket costs? Do you have any idea?" Marcus glanced down at his own suit, at Amara's yellow dress, at the pink backpack she had insisted on bringing because it had her name embroidered on the front, and he said, still calm, still quiet, "I'm sorry, ma'am. It was an accident. My daughter and I are here for tea." He said it like an explanation, like an offering, like if he could just show this woman that he was a father with a little girl on her birthday, she would soften, because that was what people did when they saw a father and a daughter. But Victoria Ashford did not soften. Victoria Ashford's eyes flicked down to Amara, and then back up to Marcus, and something ugly moved across her face, something that had nothing to do with a jacket, and nothing to do with a shoulder, and nothing to do with anything except a set of assumptions she had been carrying inside her since she was old enough to carry anything at all. "Tea," she said, and she laughed, one short bark of a laugh, without any humor in it. "You brought your daughter here for tea, at the Kensington. Are you sure you're in the right building?" The lobby went very quiet. Marcus felt Amara's hand tighten around his. He felt his own pulse begin to slow, the way it always slowed in moments like this, the way it had been trained to slow a long time ago, in another life, in another country, under circumstances he did not talk about, not even to the woman he had married, not even to the daughter he had raised. He looked at Victoria Ashford, and he said, in a voice that was somehow gentler than it had any right to be, "Ma'am, my daughter's name is Amara. Today is her 8th birthday. I've saved for 6 months to bring her here. I'm not looking for any trouble." I apologized. "If you'll excuse us, we're going to go to our table." And he began slowly to step around her. That was the moment. That was the moment Victoria Ashford, 42 years old, worth $4.6 billion, heiress to a fortune she had not built and a name she had not earned, drew back her right hand, the one with the enormous emerald ring on the middle finger, and slapped Marcus Ellis across the face so hard that Amara actually screamed. The sound was what people would remember. Not the words, not the argument, the sound. The wet crack of skin on skin, followed by a half-second of absolute silence, followed by Amara's small high voice crying out, "Daddy," and reaching for him with both hands. Marcus did not move. Blood was already gathering at the corner of his cheekbone where the ring had caught him. He did not raise his hand. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked down at his daughter, and then he looked back up at Victoria. And in that look there was something so old and so still and so quietly terrible that the bodyguard standing behind her, a man named David Reyes, felt the hair on the back of his neck lift, because he had seen that stillness before in the eyes of men who had done things most people could not survive. David Reyes had been Victoria Ashford's head of security for 6 years, and in those 6 years he had watched her humiliate waiters, scream at pilots, and once fire a nanny in the middle of a birthday party for a 4-year-old. He had learned, the way all men in his position learned, to keep his face blank and his hands folded and his opinions locked in the small metal box at the back of his skull, where opinions could not get him fired. But David Reyes had not always been a bodyguard. Before he had worn a black suit and an earpiece and stood 3 feet behind a billionaire, David Reyes had worn a different uniform, in a different country, under a different sky, and he had learned in that uniform to notice things that other people did not notice. He noticed exits. He noticed hands. He noticed the way a man stood when he had been trained to stand, the way a man breathed when he had been trained to breathe. And as he took that involuntary step forward, as Victoria Ashford's slap hung in the air and Amara's small cry filled the lobby, David Reyes noticed something else. He noticed the tiny, almost invisible pin fastened to the underside of Marcus Ellis's lapel. It was not on the outside, where a man might wear it for show. It was tucked underneath, on the fabric that folded against the chest, the way a man wears something only he needs to know is there. And David Reyes recognized the shape of that pin the way a priest recognizes a cross in the dark. He recognized the color. He recognized the small 5-pointed star. And his entire body went cold. "Ma'am," David said, and his voice came out lower than he had intended, tighter than he had intended, and Victoria did not hear him because Victoria was still talking. Victoria was still telling Marcus that she was going to have him arrested. Victoria was still telling the concierge to call the police. Victoria was still telling everyone in the lobby that this man had assaulted her. This man had put his hands on her. This man had threatened her in front of witnesses. And would somebody please do something about it? Marcus said nothing. He was crouching now, down at Amara's level, wiping the tear off her cheek with his thumb, whispering something to her that nobody else could hear. Amara was nodding, but she was still shaking. And David Reyes was still staring at that pin. "Ma'am," he said again, louder this time, and Victoria finally turned. "What?" she snapped. "What is it? Do not just stand there, David. Do something. Get him out of my hotel." David Reyes did not move. He looked at his employer, the woman who signed his paychecks, the woman who had once made him wait outside a restaurant in a snowstorm for 2 hours, and he said very quietly, very carefully, "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice." Victoria stared at him, as if he had spoken in a language she did not recognize. "Excuse me," she said. David Reyes stepped around her. He walked past her, which he had never done in 6 years of employment, and he stopped in front of Marcus Ellis, and he did something that made every person in the lobby of the Kensington Grand fall silent. He came to attention. He straightened his shoulders, squared his feet, dropped his chin 1/4 of an inch, and raised his right hand in a slow, precise, formal salute. He held it there. He did not speak. He did not move. And Marcus Ellis, still crouched beside his daughter, looked up at him. And for the first time since Victoria Ashford had slapped him across the face, something in his expression cracked. His eyes filled. He did not cry, but he nodded, once very slightly, the way one soldier nods at another, and David Reyes held the salute until Marcus, slowly, stood up from his crouch and returned it. The lobby did not breathe. The concierge had stopped dialing. The tourists had stopped filming. Even the piano in the corner had stopped playing, because the pianist, a man in his 60s who had served 3 tours in a war most Americans had forgotten, had stood up from his bench and was now standing at attention too, his hand pressed flat over his heart. Victoria Ashford looked from her bodyguard, to the man she had just slapped, to the pianist across the room, and back to her bodyguard. And for the first time in, perhaps 20 years, a small crack of doubt appeared at the edge of her enormous certainty. "David," she said, and her voice had lost some of its edge, "what are you doing? What is happening? Explain this to me right now." David Reyes lowered his hand. He turned to face her. And in a voice that was calm and steady and unmistakably furious, he said, "Ma'am, the man you just struck is Master Sergeant Marcus Ellis, United States Army, retired. The pin on his lapel is the Medal of Honor. He is one of 11 living recipients in this country. He is the reason a mountain pass in Kandahar has an American name on it. He carried 7 men out of an ambush in 2011 with 2 bullets in his own leg, and he went back for the 8th. Ma'am, you just slapped a national hero across the face in front of his 8-year-old daughter on her birthday in the lobby of a hotel, and there are 43 witnesses, at least 12 of whom are recording it on their phones right now." The silence that followed was the loudest silence Victoria Ashford had ever heard in her life. Somewhere behind her, one of the tourists, without meaning to, said, "Oh my God." Somewhere behind that, another voice said, "I got the whole thing." Victoria's mouth opened. It closed. It opened again. She looked at Marcus, really looked at him for the first time. And she saw, now, what she had not allowed herself to see 3 minutes ago. She saw the way he stood. She saw the tiny scar just above his left eyebrow. She saw the modest, careful dignity of a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side and chosen, for reasons entirely his own, to spend the rest of his life driving a produce truck and raising his daughter and never, ever telling anyone what he had done. And then she saw the phones. Dozens of them. All pointed at her. All recording. Before we go on, if this story is hitting you the way I think it's hitting you, do me a favor and hit that like button. Tap subscribe if you haven't yet. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from tonight. Victoria Ashford had spent 42 years learning how to control a room. She had learned it from her father, who had built the Ashford empire out of shipping contracts and steel, and who had taught her when she was 9 years old that the person who spoke last was the person who won. She had learned it in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in ballrooms, at dinner tables where senators asked for her opinion, and hedge fund managers laughed at her jokes, because her laughter was the sound of money in the room. She had never, not once in her entire adult life, stood in front of a crowd of people and not known exactly what to say. But she was standing in front of a crowd of people now, and she did not know what to say. Her mouth kept opening and closing and opening again, and the words that came out were not words at all. They were fragments. They were half syllables. They were the sound of a woman whose entire operating system had just crashed in public. "I didn't," she said. "I didn't know. I didn't. He should have. He should have said something. He was wearing a regular suit. How was I supposed to?" Marcus Ellis looked at her. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply looked at her, the way a man looks at something he has decided he is not going to be angry about, because being angry would cost him something he was not willing to spend. And then he turned away from her entirely and knelt back down beside his daughter. "Amara," he said, And his voice was soft again, the same voice he used when he read to her at night, the same voice he used when he told her that her mother could still see her from wherever she was. "Amara, sweetheart, look at me. Are you okay?" Amara nodded, but her chin was trembling, and there was a small line of tears running down the side of her nose, and she was holding onto the pink backpack with both hands the way a child holds onto a lifeboat. "Daddy," she whispered, "your face is bleeding." Marcus reached up and touched his cheek, and his fingers came away red, and he smiled at her, actually smiled, and said, "That's all right, baby. That's just a little scratch. You know what your daddy always says. A little scratch never stopped a Ellis." Amara let out a small, watery laugh, because that was a family joke, the one her mother used to say, the one Marcus had inherited and passed down, and hearing it in that lobby, in that moment, was the thing that finally broke the tension in her small, shaking body. And she threw her arms around her father's neck and pressed her face into his shoulder and cried the way an 8-year-old cries, without dignity and without shame, and Marcus held her and rocked her and told her that everything was okay, everything was okay, and that they were still going to have their tea, because he had promised, and Elisa's kept their promises. David Reyes was still standing at attention beside them. He had not moved. He would not move, not until Marcus told him to. Across the lobby, the general manager of the Kensington Grand had emerged from a back office, a tall man in a navy suit whose face had gone the specific color of a person who had just realized that the worst day of his professional life was happening in his own building. He crossed the marble floor at a pace that was almost a run, and he stopped just short of Marcus. And he said in a voice that was 3 octaves higher than it should have been, "Sergeant Ellis, sir, on behalf of the entire staff of the Kensington Grand, I am so profoundly, deeply, unspeakably sorry for what has just happened to you and your daughter in our lobby. Anything you want, anything at all. Your tea is on the house. Your suite is on the house. Your car home is on the house. Please, sir, please, let us make this right." Marcus stood up slowly, still holding Amara against his chest, and he looked at the manager. And he said, "Thank you. We would like our tea. That's all we came for." The manager nearly wept with relief. He gestured urgently at the concierge, at the maitre d', at a young woman in a black dress who was already hurrying forward with a warm towel and a small silver first aid kit, and the entire machinery of the hotel, which 4 minutes ago had been frozen in horror, now sprang into motion around Marcus and Amara like an orchestra remembering how to play. Victoria Ashford was still standing where she had been standing. Nobody was looking at her. That was the part she would remember later, in the sleepless small hours of the morning, in the weeks and months that followed. Not the phones, not the videos, not the tweets or the news anchors or the board meeting where her own uncle would ask her to step down from the foundation her grandfather had built. The part she would remember was that in the lobby of the Kensington Grand Hotel, 43 people had stopped looking at her, all at once, as if she had simply ceased to exist. She had spent her entire life making sure that people looked at her, and in the space of 90 seconds, she had made herself invisible. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at it, dumbly, the way a person looks at a stranger's phone. It was her assistant. The text said, in all capital letters, "Turn on Channel 7." And below that, another text from her publicist that just said, "Call me now." And below that, a third text from her uncle, the chairman of the board, that said only 4 words. "We need to talk." The first video hit the internet at 3:11 in the afternoon, 14 minutes after the slap. It was 17 seconds long. It had been filmed by a college student named Priya Menon, who had been sitting in the lobby waiting for her mother, and who would later say in an interview that she had started filming the second she heard Victoria's voice rise, because something in her gut had told her that this was going to matter. The video showed the slap. It showed the blood. It showed Amara's scream. It showed David Reyes stepping forward and saluting. It showed the pianist standing up. And it showed in perfect focus the small pin on the underside of Marcus Ellis's lapel, the 5-pointed star, the pale blue ribbon, the letters that were legible even on a phone screen. By 3:30, the video had 400,000 views. By 4 o'clock, it had 2 million. By 6 o'clock, the President of the United States had seen it. The tea service at the Kensington Grand that afternoon was the most photographed tea service in the history of the hotel, But not a single one of those photographs was posted to the internet, because the staff had quietly informed every guest in the tea room that anyone caught filming Master Sergeant Ellis and his daughter would be escorted out of the building and asked never to return. And so, in a small private alcove near the tall east-facing window, where the afternoon light came in soft and gold across the white tablecloth, Marcus Ellis and his daughter Amara sat across from each other and ate finger sandwiches and tiny scones with clotted cream and jam, and Amara asked whether the little cakes with the pink icing were the ones the Queen ate. And Marcus told her that the Queen absolutely ate those exact cakes, and Amara nodded very seriously and picked one up with her pinky finger extended, the way she had seen ladies do it on television. The cut on Marcus's cheek had been cleaned and covered with a small clear bandage. Someone had brought him a fresh pocket square. Someone else had quietly slipped an envelope onto the table, and when Marcus opened it, he found the 6 months of savings he had spent on this afternoon returned to him in crisp new bills, along with a handwritten note from the general manager that said only, "This belongs to you, sir, and we are honored to have you as our guest." Marcus folded the note carefully and put it in his inside pocket, next to the small silver locket that had belonged to his wife. The rest of the world, meanwhile, was on fire. By 7 o'clock that evening, the video had 112 million views. It had been shared by 3 sitting senators, 2 former presidents, for professional athletes, and the official account of the United States Army, which had posted it with a single line of text, "We stand with Master Sergeant Ellis." The Ashford Foundation's website crashed under the weight of angry visitors. The Ashford Global Holdings stock price dropped 9% in after-hours trading. 3 separate luxury brands announced, within a 2-hour window, that they were terminating their partnerships with Victoria Ashford effective immediately. The board of the foundation Marcus had never heard of, the one Victoria had built as a tax structure and a photo opportunity, held an emergency conference call at 9:45 that night, and by 10:15, Victoria Ashford had been removed as chairwoman by a unanimous vote, including the vote of her own uncle, who did not look at her when he raised his hand. She sat alone in the study of her penthouse apartment on the 72nd floor of a building she had inherited, and she watched the lights of the city move below her, and she understood, for the first time in her adult life, that money was not the same thing as protection. Marcus Ellis did not watch any of it. Marcus Ellis took his daughter home at 6:45, exactly 15 minutes later than he had planned, because Amara had wanted to look at the fountain in the lobby one more time on the way out. He gave her the silver locket at 7:15, sitting on the edge of her bed, and she cried, and then he cried, and then they laughed about crying, and then she fell asleep with the locket clutched in her small hand, and Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed and watched her breathe for a long time, the way he had watched her breathe every night for the last 3 years, since the accident, since the world had shrunk down to just the 2 of them. His phone was on the nightstand. It had been ringing since 4 in the afternoon. He had not answered a single call. At some point near midnight, he picked it up and scrolled through the missed numbers, and he saw the name of an old friend from a service, and a reporter from a major newspaper, and a producer from a morning show, and near the bottom of the list, a number he did not recognize, with a Washington area code. He did not call any of them back that night. He put the phone face down on the nightstand, and he kissed his daughter on the forehead, and he went to bed. 3 weeks later, Marcus Ellis stood in the rose garden of the White House, in a new suit that had been tailored for him free of charge by a shop on Fifth Avenue, whose owner had wept when Marcus walked in, and he listened to the President of the United States tell a story he had not told anyone in 15 years about a mountain pass in Kandahar and 7 men and an 8th man and 2 bullets, and a decision that had been made in the span of 4 seconds by a 21-year-old sergeant, who had believed that day that he was going to die. Amara stood beside him in a new yellow dress with little white flowers, holding his hand, and when the president finished speaking, she looked up at her father with those enormous brown eyes, and she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch, "Daddy, everyone knows now." And Marcus smiled, and he squeezed her hand, and he said quietly, "That's all right, baby. That's all right." David Reyes was in the second row of chairs. He had been fired by Victoria Ashford within 6 hours of the incident, and hired by Marcus's new security detail within 24. He wore a small pin on his own lapel that afternoon, one he had not worn in public in 11 years, And when Marcus caught his eye across the garden, David nodded. Once, the way one soldier nods at another, and Marcus nodded back. Victoria Ashford was not in the rose garden. Victoria Ashford was in a small rented apartment in a city where nobody recognized her yet, trying to figure out what a person does with the rest of her life when the only thing she was ever taught to be is the one thing she is no longer allowed to be. She had written Marcus a letter. She had written it 17 times. She had not sent it. She was not sure she ever would. But somewhere, in the small hours of a morning she could not sleep through, she had begun, for the first time in 42 years, to ask herself a question she did not know the answer to. And that, perhaps, was the beginning of something. Or perhaps it was not. Some stories do not end with redemption. Some stories end with a bill, finally, coming due. If this story moved you tonight, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, because I read every single one. And I'll see you in the next story.